Well, good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. With three branches of government, it's clear that the executive branch gets the most attention. That was true even before President Trump took office. The legislative branch has slipped in the eyes of most people, even more so with the recent shutdown. But the judicial branch has picked up the slack, and not always in a very constructive manner. There's hardly a move the president makes that doesn't get a second round of engagement from the courts. President Trump does push the boundaries at times, but our legal system is full of liberal judges who seem to constantly take issue with the president. And they think nothing of holding up his decisions, whether there's any legal basis for doing so or not. Well, of course, the three-branch system of government was designed to provide checks and balances so that no single department would get too powerful. But right now, it looks as though our government is tripping over itself. All the American people, the taxpayers who they're supposed to be working for, are caught in the middle. Well, with that, I want to introduce someone who can help sort this out for us tonight. Joining us now is Hans von Spakovsky. He's the Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome back, Hans.
Alan, thanks for having me back.
Before we get into the specific issues at play, can you give us your thoughts on whether this is just business as usual or is it dysfunction on a national level that we haven't witnessed before?
No, I don't think we've seen this before. What's going on is basically judicial warfare. You have rogue federal judges concentrated in certain areas of the country, mostly Massachusetts, California, Maryland, Washington State, who are issuing rulings against the president, against executive action, when not only do they not have a legal basis for it, but in some instances, they're actually violating federal law. And we've never really had this kind of problem before in our history.
Well, let's begin with the tariffs. President Trump has been trying to level out the country's trading position with the rest of the world. U.S. production has gone down for years as other countries with cheap labor produce look-alike products to undercut U.S. business. The legality of tariffs have been challenged before, as far back as the late 1800s. But now they're being challenged again. What's your guess on how the current case before the Supreme Court is going to end up?
Boy, that's really hard to predict. I can tell you that when the arguments were held just a week or so ago, there seemed to be a lot of skepticism amongst many of the justices over whether the president had the legal authority to do what he did. That doesn't mean that they're going to rule against him. You often just can't tell how the Supreme Court is going to rule. But I can tell you that part of the issue here is the president acted under a 1977 law passed by Congress. That law has never, ever been up before the Supreme Court before, so they're going to be striking new ground on deciding whether or not the president acted within the authority of that statute.
Well, from the White House point of view, the tariffs are working and they're bringing in a lot of money to help pay down our debt. Listen to the vice president's comments.
Success with tariffs. People forget that we inherited the largest peacetime deficit in the history of the United States of America. And now, because the president is not letting foreign countries take advantage of us, we're collecting hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars over 10 years in tariffs from countries and companies that were formerly taking advantage of the American people.
During the court's Q&A, questions were brought up about how any change could be implemented, given that $1.5 billion have already been collected from foreign countries. Is that going to be a factor in their decision?
Yeah, I think it would be. If we assume for just a second that they rule against the president, and I don't think that's certain, it's possible because they understand the complexity of trying to return that kind of funds, that would be almost impossible to do. And what they might do is say that their decision is not retroactive, but that the tariffs going forward are basically ended and the president can't oppose them. But again, we don't know if that's going to be the decision that they issue.
Well, another big issue that we hear about, it seems like every week, is whether the president has the authority to take out the drug runners coming from South America. You'd think that even the Democrats would be happy to see drugs sinking to the bottom of the ocean, but instead they're challenging him on whether he's exceeding his war powers and should have sought out congressional approval. Where do you see this ending?
Well, you know, what's odd about this is that presidents have been engaging in these kind of actions for decades. And you didn't hear Democrats previously bring up that kind of an issue, questioning the authority of the president. Even during George Bush Sr.'s presidency, apparently American troops were in places like Bolivia, going after drug labs in places where drugs were being created. This is not something new. The president basically promised he was going to do that, and Congress for many years has often tried to claim that no president can take military action outside of the country unless Congress, for example, has issued a declaration of war. Alan, you and I know that is just not the case, that in the 250 years of our history, we've been involved in many, many, many conflicts, and only in a handful of occasions has Congress actually declared war.
You know, I'm curious, these judges that are making these rulings, does one's behavior reinforce the other? Because it is, as you said, a new precedent, and yet they have a remarkable courage in stepping into this new arena. Where are they finding that?
Yeah. I don't think it's courage. I think it's ideology. Almost all of these decisions are coming from Biden and Obama judges. And the reason for that is that Barack Obama and Joe Biden in particular, they nominated and unfortunately got confirmed to the federal bench the most left-wing partisan ideologues that we've ever had sit on the federal bench. And all you have to do is look at the backgrounds of these judges and look at the decisions they've been issuing to realize that's the case. They don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about the law. They are pushing their view of what the policies of the U.S. should be on these issues.
So I suppose the notion that Lady Justice is blind has been completely put away?
Yeah, it certainly is for these judges. I mean, there are very specific instances where I can cite to you where they not only have not obeyed the law, but actually have violated federal law in issuing, for example, injunctions against the president.
Well, Hans, we need to take a short break. Can you stay for another segment?
Happy to do so.
For those of you watching, this would be a good time to share your opinion on these legal matters and whether the judges are playing too strong a hand or not. I'll be right back. We're back now with the Senior Legal Fellow on Law Reform Initiatives at the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Let's move to some of the other issues. In August, the Office of Special Counsel confirmed that it had opened an inquiry into the former Special Counsel Jack Smith and whether his work during the Biden years crossed the line into political activity that's prohibited by federal employees. From what you've seen so far, is there a case to be made against Smith?
Oh, I certainly think that opening an investigation was justified. I mean, think about what we've just recently seen, the revelations about Operation Arctic Frost, in which Smith, under his supervision, issued subpoenas to and was investigating literally hundreds of conservative organizations, individuals, even seizing the phone records of 8 Republican members of the U.S. Senate. He had no justification for doing that. You can't even start an investigation like that unless you have a reasonable suspicion that criminal laws were violated. I don't think a single U.S. senator, it could be claimed, was violating federal criminal law because they were doing their job, including raising questions about the 2020 election outcome.
Well, at the same time, there are several congressional committees who are looking at this as well. Senator Lindsey Graham believes that Jack Smith and others would not have brought indictments against Trump if he hadn't been running for president again. Listen to how the senator describes what happened.
He announced he's going to run for president in 2022 for the 24 election. Within 8 months, 91 indictments were levied against him. Here's what I believe. If he had never announced he was going to run for president, none of this would have happened. They were trying to destroy his comeback. This was all orchestrated by Jack Smith, Alvin Bragg, Fannie Willis, Letitia James to destroy this man so he could not win in 2024. If they don't pay a price now, they'll keep doing it.
Hans, do you agree that all of them, Smith, Bragg, Fannie Willis, and Letitia James, should pay a price?
Oh, I do. And I agree that these were bogus and frivolous lawsuits. I mean, look, the lawsuit filed by Fannie Willis, a local DA in Atlanta, Georgia, she's been recused from the case along with her entire office because of her unethical behavior in this case. It never should have been filed in the first place. The same is true with Alvin Bragg's cases in New York. He decided he'd rather go after Donald Trump for made-up supposed crimes as opposed to dealing with the real crimes that go on in his city, which is one of the reasons that the crime rates have skyrocketed in New York.
You know, I don't remember a time when there was so much legal firepower aimed at one president. It sure looks like trained lawyers and even judges are trying to use the law to influence their political agenda rather than because any laws have been broken. What's your sense of this?
Oh, no, I agree with that. And look, I'll just give you one example that shows that what you just said is true. In many of these cases, even including the ones down in Georgia filed by Fannie Willis, they criminally indicted the lawyers who were simply doing what lawyers are supposed to do, provide legal advice to their clients. And yet they were indicted, the lawyers that were providing advice, for example, to Donald Trump and his campaign in Georgia, they were criminally indicted in those cases. That was so obnoxious and frankly outrageous that anything like that happened. And some of these cases are still going on in places like Wisconsin.
Are there any professional organizations, I mean, I don't know, the ABA, are there any governing bodies that can respond to this, or is it all just a political discussion?
Well, the problem with political bodies like the ABA is that they are just as left-wing, unfortunately, as many of these prosecutors. In California, you have the Bar Association out there trying to suspend the law license of a lawyer named John Eastman. Why? Because he provided legal advice to Donald Trump. And that tells you that, unfortunately, many of these legal organizations, associations, have become basically partisan organizations.
Well, the president has a limited time to achieve what he promised the more than 77 million people who voted for him. The judges, on the other hand, might be able to work well past the president's second term. Is there anything the president could do to speed his agenda along or go around them more often? Or does he just have to continue to deal with the mud they're putting under his shoes?
Well, I will tell you the Justice Department has been trying to deal with these judges, many of whom, I have no doubt, they know that what they're doing is wrong, but they are trying to delay the Trump administration from achieving its goals. What the Justice Department has been doing is filing emergency appeals with the U.S. Supreme Court, trying to skip over the usual Court of Appeals process, which would delay getting any kind of remedy. And they've been very, very successful. Supreme Court this summer has probably issued more stays of lower court decisions than I've ever seen them do before, all of them on emergency appeals from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General.
Well, you mentioned the Supreme Court. I've got one last question quickly. You know, the threat is existing out there that given the opportunity, the Democrats would change the rules and pack the court. Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
If Democrats got control of the Senate and House and the White House, yes, I think they would do that. And if they were able to pack the court with the kind of ideologues that they have put in other positions, I can tell you this, Alan, our Bill of Rights would become void. The Second Amendment would no longer exist. Folks like you would be censored by the government under the First Amendment. It would be frankly, the end of the country.
Wow. Well, Hans von Spakovsky, thank you for your time today and your clarity.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it's extremely helpful to get your insights on what we're seeing. I hope you'll come back again as these issues get some resolution. In a moment, there's real hope, and we'll talk about it. No lawyers needed for this. I'll be right back. You know, we have witnessed an unsettling trend over the past year. We had a presidential election, and what the people voted to happen has been interrupted, if not completely hijacked, by our legal system, with judges trying to impede policies that the voters supported. We had judges who single-handedly opposed efforts to deport criminal cartel members who are in this country illegally. Some rushed to the defense of instigators of violent anti-Semitic protest on college campuses. We even had judges who tried to block biological males in women's prisons from returning to men's prison facilities. They ruled that prisons cannot withhold continuing medical hormonal treatments for these biological males. Well, growing up, I never imagined that in this great nation of ours, there would be a day when we would have mayors of major cities refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement and governors using their power to help them resist. Elected government officials picking and choosing the laws they would like to enforce, even if it went against the will of the voters. We need to pay attention to what is happening. There's a great power struggle taking place in the earth, and it's a mistake for the church to think and to process this in the same way that the secular community does. I'm a bit grieved when the Christian community sees the world through the same lens that the secular community uses. It reflects how shallow our spiritual awareness truly is. I don't think the best way to understand what's happening in our world is that it's a conflict between political parties or even about forms of governance. All of those things are certainly in conflict right now, and they're tearing at the fabric of our world. But I believe underneath all of those things, there is a spiritual conflict. I'm not denying the power of economics or political power. They're certainly legitimate, but I believe the greatest power that shapes human destiny is spiritual. And that message has to begin in the church. If we as Christ followers deny the spiritual power of the kingdom to which we profess we belong, then we leave the world in an enormous deficit. It's an exciting time. It's not a time void of drama. The reality is God is moving in the earth, and we as Christ followers must track with Him and find the courage to tell the truth and let our voices be heard in the public square. If we'll do that, I assure you there is reason for hope. We'll be back with your emails in just a moment. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. Just a reminder before we get to your emails, we're going to do an entire program with just your emails. So if you haven't yet submitted your questions or your thoughts or your ideas, you can do so at ajnow.com. And very soon we'll do a show with just your thoughts. Kathy C. from the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska said, as a compassionate, critical thinker, I cannot make sense of the concept of a U.S. government shutdown. How can a democratic country of, by, and for the people have the option of shutting down for political leverage? Well, Kathy, I think the key is in the words you used. They were looking for political leverage. It was poor leadership. They were clearly more focused on their selfish ambition and selfish gains than the well-being of the people that we have elected them to lead. It's an unfortunate season. A viewer on Facebook commented, I love the statement you said, it's not compassionate to encourage illegal behavior. Well, I have said that repeatedly and frequently. There's just kind of a qualification. I don't think we should ever confuse legal with moral. There have been times we've had some very immoral laws, and I don't believe that Christians should all comply with them. The notion of civil disobedience is a part of the portfolio of Christian behavior. But in this case, ignoring our national immigration law and opening our borders and all of the things that that means as citizens of this country is a devastating behavior, and it should not be encouraged, and it's not an expression of compassion. Finally, B. Berea emailed, the portions of the Culture and Christianity Conference that you've been airing on Alan Jackson Now, which I never miss, have profoundly touched my heart. And after today's episode, I had to watch again. I need to absorb it, take notes, continued prayers, and God's blessings. Well, thank you for that. And for everybody listening, if you ever miss an episode or if you want to watch one again, You can just go to ajnow.com. There's a full archive there of the programs. They're easy to share with a friend, or if you want to review one and take some notes so you can make the content your own. You know, when you quote me for the second time, it becomes your idea and not mine. Again, thank you for spending a bit of time with us today. God bless you and have a good evening.